to these documents. You know, what did you think of them? What questions might you have had? What wasn't clear? As I said, I'm pulling these together. I didn't have time to pull together 8, which is probably good for you. And I've also put a population time chart of China up on the board there. So just get your reactions. And then what I'd like to ask is how you, especially those of you who are teaching the AP World History, might use this, or those of you who are teaching art history. And I'll give those of you who are teaching art history some additional sources here too. But how you might use this in a class. You know, do you see a way at a point that, let's see, we're in the 2nd semester. I don't know where you are in your courses, but is the AP World taught as a semester course or a year-long course? Year-long course. So you're along somewhere, and then see what you think about. You know, could you use this? If so, how? So, comments, observations about these documents. Are these what I should say? One of the things I try to get my students to appreciate. I use primary sources in almost every class, every day, and we just read a document from 1000 BC. And it's about the mandate of heaven, talking about that. And so what I try to get my students to understand is that these are voices from the past talking to you. You know, we've got to listen to these. So what are they saying? Why are they saying it? What can we learn? Isn't it kind of neat to be listening to somebody from 3,000 years ago, or in the case of Chun Pu from merely 900 some years ago? But so we got these voices that are we're bringing them back to life. They're dead, but we're bringing them back to life. So anyway. Open it up for comments, questions, observations. On these? No? Oh, come on. Now, wouldn't you? Okay, I got a couple over here. Is it?
I think it's always good for the students because, you know, they're 15. You always have to remember their age.
Yes.
They're so young, right? And it's just fun. I think it's great for them to see, to hear voices and to see how, you know, intelligent these people were and how complicated their lives were. Because sometimes these kids...
900 years ago, you mean, the Chun Pu talking about...
that, you know, today is everything and we're so much more advanced. And then when they read these things and how complicated and what was going on and what they had to deal with, I think it helps them.
Yeah, I don't know about most colleges and universities, history is, we're experiencing a decline in numbers of majors, people going into business because their parents want them to get jobs and this, that, and the other thing. And so I was kind of struck by the first sentence of this Chun Pu article. All those who engage in business, right? So what can we learn about it from there? So yeah, so intelligent, engaged, observant. Kyle, you had it.
I really like that first document and kind of being in that particular time period. I thought it was a great place for students to understand that farmers were really smart, and farmers had systems that they used that were based in experience, but also you could see an element there of science.
Yeah.
And you know, some of the smartest people that I've met are farmers. They have systems to move things that somebody else might not understand, of sliding something rather than lifting and pushing it somewhere else, or how to make these plants grow over time. There's an advice here, and there's a printing element, and there's a tried and true system, and a recommendation for behavior, and there's a type of moral behavior embedded in the document as well. So it's a really complex document about expectations of lifestyle, and we're talking again 900 years ago. Would this be great advice for farmers today? You know, coming straight from a farmer. I think it's very powerful. There's a funny joke about farming, and someone from back east from agricultural university coming to somebody in Kansas and saying that they were going to teach them all the ways to farm better. And the farmer says, I already know all the ways to farm better, I just don't have time. And you know, it's funny that it happens in education a lot too, that other people come and tell us how much better they can teach, but we go, I already know how to teach better. We just don't have time and energy to do that.
I have a comment or a question for Kyle. You mentioned that here you have a farmer who seems to be intelligent, articulate, scientific, engaged. And I was wondering if that might be a point that you could bring some contemporary stuff in and say, well, how many of you know a farmer, right? What percentage of the American population are farmers? What, 3%, something like that? So you might be able to say, get into the question of, well, why is it that 90 to 95% of the people who were living at this time were farmers? And what's that all about? So, I mean, I don't know any farmers. I know somebody who has a chicken coop, you know, and raises chickens and sells them. But yeah.
I think one of the things too that I like about it, this is a handbook, which was meant to be spread throughout the empire.
Yes.
And then everybody's, you know, the extension service at the time. So even those who don't know, who maybe having problems, they can go and look and see, well, how does somebody else do it? Which
Yeah.
around the are also, then this is spread. This handbook eventually get translated, help Europeans or anything like that later on? Or anything similar?
I'll make a comment about the printing of the handbook, and then get to how this gets disseminated. And I didn't think about this until you just mentioned this, but the Sung, you know, about 1,000 years ago, at the beginning of the Sung, is when Chinese printing evolved from simply having entire pages carved and being able to then be printed to movable print. So at this point, we've got movable block printing going on. And so the price of the cost of printing is just plummeting rather dramatically. And so the amount of stuff that's published and printed is just skyrocketing. And so that technological innovation makes it possible for there to be a wide dissemination of these ideas. And that's an interesting other kind of direction that you could go if you had a, there's lots of documents on Chinese printing. So that's, but I hadn't thought about that as an angle. It's a really interesting way to go. And you know, you can bring out examples of Chinese printing and the all kinds of stuff. That's a really interesting idea. So this could be used as a document about technology, as about dissemination of ideas. It can go beyond the material stuff having to do with farming. Yes.
Part of the new, there's a new form this year, so there's no longer the second essay. It's a little bit.
No more CCOT.
No more CCOT. But part of
Change in
DBQ
continuity over time.
Yeah.
One of the choices.
Yeah, it's one of the choices, but it has is a different structure. And the DBQ is a little bit more complicated, and you have to add contextualization. And this
Yes.
would be great.
Yes, I saw, and I think the contextualization is 1 point for the contextualization, which is a big amount.
But you know, outside facts, you have to add those,
Yeah.
and you have to add synthesis. So I think the students need to learn how to do this kind of thing.
Yeah. So even just this one document could be used in a classroom in a lot of ways. It's not too long to be used in the classroom. What would you give a student, maybe 5 to 7 minutes to read and think about this, and then work on it, come back to it? Pretty interesting. Then on how some of this gets disseminated, the connection with foreigners and especially Europeans, there's a long, interesting history. But it's not until the 18th century where there's more people who are traveling around within China. Prior to that, you've got Jesuit missionaries and a few others who are connected with the court and advising the court in Beijing and aren't really getting out much. But there's a number of people who, French for various reasons, who observe farming and who make comments on it. And then it gets into publications in France and then is translated into English. Duhalde did a book, and then a fellow by the name of, I don't know how, I don't speak French, so it's Poivre, you know, whatever it is, however he does it. So those are 18th century texts, and those get then disseminated to Europeans. Poivre, however you pronounce that name, and I didn't think about this, but he also made an observation on he says, what is the secret of the Chinese that they're able to produce so much food on such little land? And he said 2 things. One, no land is given over to pasturage for draft animals. No animals. The only animals that the Chinese have on their farms are pigs and chickens. And this goes into another interesting set of issues as well. And the other is, he says, by constant fertilizing. You know, he says every scrap of land is used for the farm, nothing for animals, draft animals, and then fertilizing. And he says something to the effect, wouldn't it be wonderful if our farmers could figure this out? How to do that. So yeah, you can then go, you can do comparative stuff. I mean, I think that's really pretty interesting. Very interesting stuff. How would 15-year-olds react to a discussion of what's in your shit as kind of you know, would they would like that, right? You know, you could say, well, how much reactive nitrogen does each of us produce annually? Well, it's about 2.2 kilos. What's a kilo, right? Anyway, you know, and so, I mean, the numbers that King comes up with here are really pretty impressive, right? We're fertilizer machines, you know, from the point of view of farming prior to prior to the manufacturing of chemical fertilizers. But so is this isn't too icky for a? Would they just like that kind of?
I'll perk right up.
Oh, yeah. That'll get there. Yeah. Hi,
There's
Elaine. Yes.
yeah, the one on weeding, because
Oh,
some of
yeah.
them may have pulled weeds in a flower box before, maybe. And so, and it talks about how, you know, some people who don't know, modern farmers, ignorant of these principles, throw the weeds away. And that's exactly what, we have green waste, right, that comes and gets our weeds. And so that might be a way to help them see that maybe we don't know everything, you know?
Yeah.
Or help them understand that they maybe had something in that we don't know.
I think most families have house plants at least. Something. There might not be weeds in there. If you live in California, we've got flowers outside, and you're always pulling stuff out of there. But among the reasons I put the micro grow fertilizer box up there is I brought that into class to begin using that, and I discuss it. And then the little symbol on the side tells you what the composition of nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus is, and you can get into that. And then their parents oftentimes have bags of Scott's fertilizer for the lawn in the garage, and you know, it's you can get them to bring stuff from home and enter into this question, and I think it's pretty interesting. The weeding part is also interesting. How many of their families actually have a mulch pile? You know, I don't know, you know, but on Home Depot you can get these casks for mulch that you go out and you throw your stuff in there and you turn it over every once in a while, and all of a sudden out comes fertilizer. Well, what's in there? You know, why is that? And how would Chen Pu have taken some advice from him? So pretty interesting. Yeah. Any other observations or ways that you might use these?
I kind of like that in the excrement one.
Frank King? Yeah.
There are several golf courses in Utah that use recycled water now for come out of the human waste recycling
Okay.
water treatment area. And one of them is Central Valley out here, and I have a couple of pictures of the signs that say, do not clean the ball, do not touch the water, enjoy your round.
And they don't explain why?
Yeah, and that's it. You know, this argument here is, I think the claim is that Asia is doing something that we should consider.
Yeah.
And then, are we doing any of that? Maybe people don't realize that we actually are doing some of that
Yeah.
already.
Well, increasingly now. I should say there's an absolutely fascinating story that's based in the United States that I put in the third edition here on the ways in which cities began to use and treat this waste and human waste. And when I grew up, there was a small town, there was a solid waste disposal, and all the solid waste after being treated was then put out into drying pans and left out there for about a year, and then it was taken in chunks and dug up and sold to farmers, or farmers had it for free and they could take it and send it back. And the city of Milwaukee was what was the first to really have an entire urban solid waste system, collecting waste from families' houses that would go into a treatment center that would then take all of those nutrients and recycle them and put them back into farms. All of that gets pretty much destroyed with the chemical fertilizer manufacturing, where there's no need to now recycle this. And instead, it all gets washed down, it gets treated, but then it's effluent that goes out either onto courses or gets treated, but you can't get rid of the nitrogen in there. So that is contributing to the runoff into the Mississippi Valley drainage system down into the Caribbean, and is contributing to the using up of oxygen and then the destruction of the reefs down there as well, in the coral, because the nitrogen causes eutrophication, the blooms and everything else. And so we're literally flushing all of that stuff down into our water system and out into the ocean, and that has rather dramatic.
So the next question I would ask
Yeah.
is, you go into the grocery store and here's all the vegetables and then here's the organic.
Yeah.
And if we've got a population that's going to explode based on synthetic nitrogen, and then we're all going to want organic, how's that going to work?
Yeah, I don't know how that's going to work. And it raises interesting questions about different states and the definition of organic and what you can and can't use, and how all of that works. But you would assume that organic means that it is using and recycling nutrients back into the soil, and it's not applying either pesticides or chemical fertilizer. Yeah. Well, the guy who did a bunch of the work on Fritz Haber and the process, he estimated that using biological old regime mechanisms, the planet had enough land to support maybe 2.5 billion people. So we're at 7.5 now. So 5 billion people are alive on the planet because of the chemical fertilizer. We're going to add another 2.5 billion over the next 30 years. And there's only one way that population is going to be sustained, and that's by increasing use of chemical fertilizers.
Well, but then you have the other problem. We build on arable land.
Yes.
We build homes on arable land.
Yes.
We don't build homes on rocky soil. We build it where it's easy.
Mhm.
And that's the easiest land to farm with. So then, you got a lot of fertilizer, do you have a place to put it?
Yeah, no, these are interesting issues. I can imagine a lot of farmland here that's gone under. China is using up vast amounts of its best farmland to build cities on. There are food issues there. We know from the news reports yesterday, 2 days ago, that half of Yemen's population of 12 million people is food insecure. They don't know where their next meal is coming from. And I think this is another, I hadn't thought about this, but this does raise issues of food supply, food security, and how it relates to a lot of issues that we're facing today. And I don't think any of us have the wisdom as to see where those are going, except to say, I don't see any option but to continue use of chemical fertilizers to feed the people who are here and who are coming in the next 30 years. And that has then these environmental consequences, right? I mean, huge to think about it.
I think your so what question is so great with this particular set and the whole document there. And even if you want to be morbid and apocalyptic, that's a fun so what for sure. But maybe a more positive one is, what industries do you think would be good ones to get into as you're going into college? Water management systems.
Water.
Critical, right? There's just no question that would be a terrific way to guarantee yourself an occupation.
Yeah.
Or,
so you can
or city planning.
City planning. Go visit your solid waste treatment plant.
Right. Get an internship there.
Find out when you flush, where does it all go?
Good field trip.
Yeah. Yep. I want to give you a site for all of you to be able to use. This is Asia for Educators at Columbia University. It's got fabulous stuff. Online museum sources for Asian art is in here, and all of these. And if you click through here and explore, there's a tremendous amount of material. And this first document, the one by Chun Pu, comes from a series of translations that they have, and they have it set up. It goes from about 1000 BC to the present of Chinese sources, and so you can use them as well. So let's just take a look. I haven't checked into the art, but we'll see what's here.
That document you referenced with the Mandate of Heaven, is that on here?
Let's see. It has to be on there. It's called the Shao Announcement. Yeah,
This is Columbia University.
Shao Announcement. Yeah, that's the Mandate of Heaven document. So yeah, I just got to, this is the online museum resources on Asian art. This is Columbia University. It's an absolutely fabulous resource. You can go and get all kinds of stuff, but let's do geography. Resources by time period. China, Warring States, Zhou, Han, language and calligraphy. So, and when you, let's just do this. So I just clicked on one of those, and we've got primary sources for DBQs, and you can just look through this. So that's for those doing the world history stuff. But let's go back and take just a quick look at the art and see how that's organized. Art subject area. Oh, let's do architecture. Time period. Let's stay back here. Country, region. Since I know China, let's do China. Is there a go button anywhere? Come on, do something.
Right next to it.
Yeah, next to the right of the pull down menu.
Oh, there it is. I see it. Okay, Age of the Great Khan. Painting and calligraphy in the Mongol Yuan dynasty. Right? And then, here we go to the museum resource. And then you saw that wasn't just China, there's all kinds of Asian countries in here. It's going a little, can't connect. All right, sorry about that. But this is, this site, Asia for Educators, is worthwhile visiting and using for history and for art history. Okay?
And that's through Columbia?
Columbia University. Yeah, if you just do Asia for Educators, you put that in the Google search bar, it'll go right there.
And one of the ones that I use, I come around the back door on this, but it's called the Song Scroll. So if you look for Song Scroll, it's through Columbia University as well, through
Yeah.
this. The Song Scroll is one from the
It's from
around the
Song.
spring celebration. It's a fully interactive little mini video clips and stuff on there, and all the different categories of the argument that during the Song Dynasty there was a modernization that preceded
Yeah.
the European modernization period. And it's really, really good. It's a great student activity. If you wanted my web quest on that, you could just email me at Kyle Pratt.
Yeah, it shows it's paintings of life along the river of the city of Kaifeng about 1100, and it shows all the activities of people doing things, including a little boy standing behind a tree taking a leak. That's in there. That's how much daily life gets depicted in this. So it's good, and I recommend it to you. Okay. All right. Let's. Oh, I'm looking around for clock. 11:15. Okay. Yeah, we'll do the plague. I don't know if we're going to have a chance to do at some point the documents from James Madison, Charles Lyell, and Deng Qi Nan on species extinction. We'll see how we do on time, but we'll bracket those. But we'll go to the plague. All right. Let me get this up, and let's hope that this doesn't. Okay. Let's. Can you, Janet? Can you turn the light off again? Yeah, because it's a little bright in here. Okay, so both the Black Death, the plague, and then the Great Dying in the Americas in the 16th century, again, can be placed in the context of the early modern world, the biological old regime, because in addition to the limitations on life and history that nitrogen places, one of the other limiting factors is, in fact, epidemic disease. Epidemic disease is a very, very serious historical agent at various times. And nature can and does have agency. It's not just that humans make history all the time. And there's a number of ideas that are behind the use of epidemic disease as a tool to think about world history. One of them is, and this was put together by William McNeill, the guy who did The Rise of the West, but he also did a book called Plagues and Peoples. And he argued that 500 BC or thereabouts, 2,500 years ago, there were what he called in the world 5 separate disease pools. That the people who lived in these ecumenical areas, China, Africa, West Europe, the Americas, had their own sets of diseases that came from animals and others, and they became accustomed to them, and there's adaptation to both the pathogens, and then the pathogens adapt. And so there's some adjustment going on. Over time, as a result of global interactions, but especially trade and those linkages of trade around the world that link parts of the world together, not only goods and people travel on those trade links, but epidemic diseases of all kinds. And when one disease that arises in one disease pool gets taken to another part of the world that doesn't have that disease, it is what epidemiologists called a what the heck is I'm blanking on it. But the idea is that they haven't had it before, and it just spreads like wildfire. So in these two instances, the Black Plague, we have an instance where the plague bacillus is transmitted from Asia, in particular in China, and we now know exactly where, through Central Asia because of the Mongol Empire and the trade routes that were there, and gets into Europe for the first time in about 800 years. There have been evidence of a plague during toward the end of the Roman Empire is pretty well gone by then, but in the 6th century, it's known as the Justinian plague. But for all intents and purposes, Europeans and others had no experience with it. Then there's a similar, the Columbian exchange. Clearly, we've got the exchange of pathogens from Europeans into native peoples of the Americas. Again, 2 disease pools coming into contact with the people who don't have experience with those diseases being pretty well devastated as well. Now, before we get on to the Black Death and the documents that I'll give you to take a look at with this, mostly the story of the Black Death has been told as a story about what happened to Europe and what happened to Europeans. What we now know as a result of work that's been done over the last 20 years is that the Black Death also spread dramatically into Egypt and up the Nile, took about half of the population of Egypt out and killed it. It was spread throughout many parts of the world that we now call India. And of course, it's mixed up in China with the end of the Mongol rule and the wars that are pushing the Mongols out. So it's kind of hard to disentangle the deaths that come from epidemic disease and those that come from shortages of food and all the other things that come in the wake of war. But we now know that the Black spread of the Black Death was not a European story only, it's a global story. And we'll get to that when we get to the documents, because mostly the documents that are available put it in the context of being a European story still. And if you Google this, some of these maps, what we'll see is that most of them turn out to be, right, it'll show Western Europe. And the spread of it from Caffa on the Black Sea, just as I think many of you know, this is the Crimean, and this is what Putin just took a couple of years ago. That's exactly where that is. Spread on Italian ships to Venice and to Genoa. And then also we have a document that shows a ship of people who had already died floated into Alexandria harbor. And that's how it spread throughout the Nile. But then you can see these lines that spread the Black Plague all the way up that way. These brown areas are areas that seem to have escaped it as well. And what we know is, and these are big numbers, right? 40 to 60% of all people in Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa died as a result of the spread of the Black Plague. Now there's interesting stories about how and why all of that happened, but it really does have to be put into a global context to be able to understand it. And there's a lot of good work that's been done on the structure of the world in 1300 or the 13th century. This is based on work that Abu Lugud did called Europe, or Before European Hegemony. This was done in the late 80s, early 90s. But what she shows is that the world, Eurasia, Afro-Eurasia, had about, depending on how she puts this together and how it's organized, 8 to 10 trading worlds. And these all have their own kinds of dynamics and how they're going and doing things. China, Pacific Ocean, Central Asia, we'll talk about that, the Indian Ocean world. But what's important about these trading circuits is that they, you know, the Venn diagrams, they all overlap in various places. So Europe is not directly connected to China, but it is through Central Asia and those trade circuits. And so the rounds of trade, it's very, very unusual for any single individual to actually conduct trade from one part of this to another, but you've got overlapping, and so goods get transferred from one boat to another, from one caravan to another. And what makes most of this 13th century world system work is not simply that there are all of these, but the fact of the Mongol conquest and the Mongol Empire in the 13th century. So, you know, to get a handle on what's going on with the plague, we've got to deal with Genghis Khan and his grandson. And there's great stories about these guys. Some are worse than others. But, you know, you can go on Ancestry.com and find out where your DNA says you're from and how much of this, that, or the other thing you have in it. Geneticists did some testing of Central Asian populations about 20 years ago and found that, I think this is a correct figure, something on the order of 70% of the population has Genghis Khan's DNA. Now, there are several documents and other things that have been, in my view, delicately translated about Genghis Khan and what he said his greatest joy in life was. His greatest joy, my greatest joy in life is taking other people's property, their horses, and caressing their wives and daughters. Well, you know what he's not caressing his wives and daughters. You know what he's doing. He's using rape as a tool of war, is what he's doing, and terror as well. So, you know, don't play with his beard. About 5 years ago, geneticists and others have, in fact, using DNA and other sources, digging up graves of plague victims in England, and then other places as well, being able to show and use, you know, I don't know how they do this, but they've been able to pinpoint the origin of that bacillus to this part. This is now China. This is in Qinghai province, but this is the corridor of the Silk Road, right there. And it came from there. And it also probably was taken by Mongol forces, especially in the 1300s, as Mongol forces to take China moved. They didn't do a direct attack on the center of Chinese power in the lower Yangtze. They came down the west into the province of Yunnan here. And Yunnan, we know, had existence of the plague in 1331, and there were plague outbreaks there. And then they went up this way. So whether or not the plague was taken directly from here with Mongol armies going that direction, or whether it was circuitous going down into China first and then getting spread there, we don't quite know exactly how all of that works. But we now know exactly where it came from, and it is right there. And we also, here's Caffa right here. This is the Crimean Peninsula. You don't want to put Russia here, you know, but this is where Caffa is. And it came as a result of Mongols were besieging Caffa, trying to take it for any number of reasons, and probably used what we would call biological warfare. They took a member of their party who had plague and flipped his body over the walls into Caffa. Italian merchants said, got the hell out of town and fled. We got these. I got to go back. I should have had this here, right? They take off and head back home as well, with the results, some of which we know about. I'm sure most of you have a unit on the teaching world history, AP World History will have a unit on the plague, the Black Plague as being an important turning point in world history. But there's, what's interesting, and I want to get to this in just a half a second, I'm going to give you some documents to take a look at. Black Death Online, if you do a search for online sources about the Black Death, they're nearly all going to be European. We have, I couldn't find any sources in Chinese, I couldn't find, then translated, I couldn't find any in Arabic, I couldn't find any, but we do know that the plague decimated those areas as well. We simply don't have documents. So one of the things in the documents that I'm going to give you here to take a look at is that the documents come from, one is from London, one is from Paris, another is a drawing from a Bible in France, and then I've appended two maps. And I just want to point this out to you. The map on the top is a black and white version of the one that I showed you, which is basically the European story of the plague. But then it's kind of hard to see because of the way they did this. There's another map down here called the Black Death. But if you look at it carefully, you can see that the Black Death is a global phenomenon in Eurasia. And this raises some of the questions as to, well, why is it that we know only or mostly about the European story of the plague and what it does. Now, these documents are a little bit longer than the ones I gave you before. So, skim through these, you'll get an idea of what's going on. One is called An Ordinance of Laborers in 1349. This is from the King of England. The second is an observer in France, actually in Paris, on the progress of the Black Plague in Paris in 1348 and 1349. And then the drawing from a Bible, the Toggenburg Bible. I don't know what the Toggenburg Bible is, 1411. And then those maps. Okay? So let's take a quick look at this, see what you make out of these, and again, think about, well, how might we use these in classes? How are students going to deal with this? What kind of stories can we generate out of them, etc. So we've got, take a look at this for, 7-10 minutes or so, and then we'll talk about it and then take a break for lunch.
Who was the historian who had the disease pools? Who had that theory?
Oh,